another key witness has died. And I refer to him as S, but I don't mind saying his name. It's Neal Sher. And this man was a DOJ official, a top DOJ official. He worked for the Department of Justice prosecuting ex-Nazis or suspected ex-Nazis. In the 1980s, he worked for the Department of Justice trying to find men who had immigrated to the US after World War II and who were suspected of lying on their applications for citizenship and believed to have actually committed war crimes during the Holocaust and deleted those references from their biographies. And so now, in the 1980s, Sher is working for the US government trying to bring these people to justice and strip them of their citizenship so that they can be deported. After that work, Sher went on to be the head of AIPAC. And after that stint as the head of AIPAC, he became the head of the New York office, the #1 lawyer for an innocuous sounding group called the American Center for Civil Justice. And this is a lawfare group that is a group that has amassed millions, perhaps hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of dollars in their lawfare activities over the years. Now, Sher is the head of the New York operations, the American side of operations, but they also have Israel offices who they work in close conjunction with. Well, it makes sense that a very prestigious lawyer like Neal Sher, ex-top government official, would head the New York office. That makes perfect sense. But who do you imagine that they appointed to head their Israel office? Didn't happen in Tel Aviv, didn't happen in Jerusalem. It happened in this teeny tiny settlement in the West Bank, in the Bethlehem area, called Elazar. Just a handful of families live there. And the reason why they made their base there is because as Sher was their top man on the US side, their top man on the Israel side was none other than Israel Fuchs, one of the alleged assassins of Alex Saudé. So for over a decade at least, this top government official, ex-head of AIPAC, worked in close conjunction with who the FBI says is one of Alex Saudé's murderers, and funneled money to these terrorists, known terrorists. Now, Fuchs, as head of the Israel operations of the ACCJ, he hires none other than Baruch Ben Yosef, another one of those assassins, hires also another lawyer by the name of Simcha Rotman, and he trains him to be his protege, working with him in the ACCJ. Now, the thing is, why is this so scandalous amongst other reasons? Sher must have known. He should have known, and he couldn't have not known. Because back in 1985, remember, before the El Nakam bombers assassinated Alex Saudé here in Los Angeles, they first bombed to death a man on the East Coast named Cherem Subzakov, one of these men who was accused of having committed war crimes during the Holocaust. Now, there's no way for me to know whether he actually did or didn't, but we do know for a fact that when a New York Times writer wrote about him that he'd committed these crimes, he sued the writer, and the New York Times was forced to pay him like $500,000. So whether he did or not, we can't say. But the point is, because he was able to put up a defense, Sher was never able to strip him of his citizenship. So once Sher failed to denaturalize Subzakov, what are you saying, David? Are you saying that he got frustrated? He wasn't able to put this supposed ex-Nazi behind bars and kick him out of the country, so therefore he turned to the El Nakam bombers and asked them to kill Subzakov, as they eventually did? I'm not saying that. I don't know that for a fact. In fact, it's unlikely in the extreme because the JDL hated Subzakov well before that. Going back to the late 70s, you have JDL, Jewish Defense League, protesting outside of Subzakov's house saying, death to Subzakov. So I don't think they needed any help from Sher to convince them to try to assassinate Subzakov. But it's been reported in the press since the 1980s that Fuchs is the top suspect of the FBI in Subzakov's murder, as well as Alex Odeh. So then you go on for another decade to work in close conjunction with this man that you know for a fact to be a murder suspect and funnel money to these terrorists? When I told this to the FBI agents, they were like, this is solid. They were pretty pissed. But they didn't do anything. And so then COVID took his life. Sher is now dead. So we can't even interview him. These were serious crimes. Funneling money to terrorists is a federal crime. He could have been forced to admit what he knew. What did he know? Who knows? But he spent a decade working with Fuchs. Surely they must have discussed the case, since they both tried to destroy Subzakov's life. But we'll never know, because the FBI failed to even interview him before he died. And what happened to Fuchs in the years that followed? Well, I told you how he trained Simcha Rotman to be his protege. After working with him in the ACCJ, they started up a new NGO together called the Movement for Governance and Democracy. So banal, the title, so Orwellian. So this group called Meshilut in Hebrew that they co-founded together. If you can imagine this group is now in the Knesset. This is a photograph of the Knesset, of a Knesset committee meeting, and that circle around the faces of Fuchs and his proteges, Rotman and Amrani, and they're actually authoring legislation that's getting passed by the Knesset. That's how deep the corruption goes. And as I said, Ben Yosef also worked for ACCJ, and he too has created a protege. He has too passed on the baton. After working for years as a lawyer, defending other Kahanist killers in court, he then trained a young activist to take over for him, another Kahanist through and through. That man has then surpassed him. Ben Yosef himself wasn't able to enter the Knesset, and neither was Fuchs, because again, to enter the Knesset, you need to give up your citizenship. And when he tried to give up his citizenship in the early 90s, the American government refused. Of course, if they had allowed him to give up his citizenship, they would never be able to extradite him, or it'd be much harder. So Ben Yosef himself will never be a Knesset member, and neither will Israel Fuchs. But they've both trained proteges that are now in the Knesset. Each of these men have front row seats where the most critical decisions facing the country are made. These two massive racists have been members of the Knesset since May, since Netanyahu brought the Kahanists back into the mainstream. This is where we are. The alleged assassins of Alex Odeh have proteges in the Israeli parliament.